Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Ilan from TAG. With me is Gal, our Chief Product Officer. In today's session, we're going to talk about OTT and how to best use it in your project. Hopefully, you get some tips from this session. So, Gal, the first question that comes in mind with OTT is, what is the difference between traditional delivery and OTT?
I would start, in a nutshell, there's a tendency to think it's an entirely different world, but it's the similarities between OTT distribution to, especially when it comes to classical broadcast distribution, are not that far away. I would say the main element where OTT is different, that the restructure of the different vendors is clear, in the sense that in traditional distribution chains, you have more than one cases where the broadcaster used to control the whole chain from camera to the home. And in OTT, by definition, there's more breaking parts. The most obvious that come to mind is the fact that usually CDN is a third party. So the broadcaster doesn't control the full chain.
Okay, so the main differences are how big is the part of the distribution chain that the broadcaster itself controls. In the traditional distribution, you had more control over the source, the cameras, everything. And in OTT, you let go of the control, and you have different vendors or distributors handling the components on your distribution chain.
To some extent. I would even mention that it's also a shift of technology. Traditional broadcast is more multicast oriented, UDP oriented, and of course OTT is a TCP, which has implication on the behavior of your network. So it's more IT oriented to some extent.
Okay, so that opens up more points during the distribution line in which we'd like to monitor our streams and maybe visualize them, know that everything's okay, verify their validity. What are these points of interest in the OTT chain?
I would say when you're talking about monitoring, the interest point is where you touch the content. So of course, when the content coming into your facility, your ingest, it's one point. Next part in OTT would be the transcoding, the generation of the multiple variants. Next part is the packager. Now, of course, in many cases, the transcoder and the packager are combined to a single solution, but there are cases where are separated. Packager push the content to the ingest point of the CDN, the region server, and that's in many cases would be the next monitor point, because this way the broadcaster will generate the content, can verify that the content he pushed to his distribution chain is okay. Now, next point, which might be interested, is it's also dependent on the structure of your network, because especially when it's come to DAI, digital ad insertion, you have cases today where the ad insertion is coming from a different platform, of course. And of course, in OTT, the end game is to try and have personal ad insertion where each customer have different content. So you might also be interested to do post-CDN monitoring in cases where somebody touched the content in the middle, for example, added ad insertion. Or of course, in cases encryption is done externally to the production house, to the distribution house.
So basically, every time the stream changes in some way or is manipulated, you'd like to monitor that point to see that everything's okay as expected.
Yeah.
And that brings me up to you mentioned encryption. What are the differences between KMS and DRM? I know that in TAG we use a unique way of handling decryption of streams. Can you elaborate on that?
So, first element, which always is raised, is how can I visualize my content after it's been published, because it's usually encrypted. Now, when it comes to DRM, there are three main players now in the market. You have Fairplay by Apple, you have Widevine by Google, and PlayReady by Microsoft. But actually, because of this nature of that environment, and of course it's software-oriented, it's changing all the time, we wanted to avoid this trust path between the DRM vendor and the end device and be agnostic to the actual DRM solution. So our approach was to integrate to the key management platform, the KMS, very similar to the way the packager does. The packager asks or receive the keys from the KMS, encrypt the content, and publish them to the origin server. So it gives us more stability from implementation point of view, because we integrate with the key management platform vendors. And on the other side, it's mean that we need to integrate with the different vendors, because there's no one way to do that, no clear standardized way. And we already did some integration with Verimatrix, for example.
Okay, so we choose to take the path of being like the packager and working only with the KMS, with the key system, instead of being like a player and working directly with the DRM, to save the always having to keep up with the DRM changes.
Yeah, stay in the red zone.
That's good. I have a question that we hear often from our customers during the POC. They ask regarding their channels, on which channels or which stream types they should monitor, which ones should they multi-view, which one should they do both?
I would say from experience that there's no right way. It's fully dependent on the specific customer workflow. Some are more oriented toward visualization, some more probing. Now, of course, in delivery, especially, the amount of channels sometimes make it inefficient to visual everything, and especially when it's come to OTT because of the nature of the ABR, everything is multiplied by bigger numbers, so it's not always practical. But I would say we do see a tendency to combine those two worlds. For example, you will probe multiple points along your chain, you will probe for multiple variants, but you still want some element of visualization, so we see more and more usage of visualization by exception. And of course, for the most important content, for example, when you have a live sport event, people are still watching the screen.
Yeah, of course. So you're differentiating the probing and the monitoring and the multi-viewing to 3 layers, basically: the monitor only, the monitor by exception, and the visualization. And you can combine them both, when the monitor by exception will give you halfway between the monitoring, full monitoring, and multi-viewing. That's nice. About monitoring and probing, there are layers of probing, starting from the network and ending at the post-CDN. What are these layers?
So originally, when we started from TS environment, MPEG transport, so it's very clear cut. First layer, of course, of monitoring is the transport layer, the packaging, the layer that packages the content. Next layer is the content itself, the so-called baseband, and of course, for example, SCSI is on that, if the SCSI messages exist or around. And third layer of monitoring is what we'll call template matching, which is current versus expected. If content changes behavior, video changes resolution, audio, you expect some audio elements to come with your video and one of them disappear. This is for classical scenarios where there's human errors, human configuration, and something disappear. Now, taking this concept to the OTT is not that different. First, you want to check that you receive the content correctly. Chunks are downloaded, are available, received correctly. Next part, if it's an HLS with a TS, of course, you can do the TS monitoring. And if it's dash-based, we can check the MP4 file to check that all the content exists there.
Yes.
Next layer will be the content. The video exists as expected, and we are able to decode it. If it's encrypted, we are able to decrypt it and decode it. And of course, the loudness monitoring, the audio monitoring.
Yes, of course. So basically, 3 layers: the transport layer, the content layer, and the template matching layer. And of course, TAG supports all of them and much more. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Let's take a few questions from the audience. We have a question from the audience. Which kind of OTT formats does TAG support?
We currently support all the common variants. We start, of course, with HLS, which use either TS-based segmentation or CMUF, MP4-based segmentation, Dash, which is MP4-based, and Microsoft SmoothString, the MSS. And we support, of course, CMUF, which is now there's a try in the market to, instead of generate the content 3 times, to come down to an agreement about a single packaging file, so you don't need to distribute the content multiple times. It's not fully closed yet because they still don't have an agreement regarding the encryption.
Yes.
Apple and the rest of the world use different systems, but it's getting there to be kind of standardized, I guess.
Oh, that's nice. Another question, what do you do with loudness monitoring and the various standards?
So when it's come to loudness monitoring, we utilize, I always forget the 3 letters. It's the EB127, it's the common agreed, the BS1770. It's the common loudness measure mechanism that is used both agreed in the US and in Europe. And that's the method that's used in the broadcast for the last couple of years. And it seems like the OTT is still not completely regulated there, but it does seem that that's the direction. So the loudness calculation and monitoring, which will apply to OTT when it will be regulated, would be not that different from classical broadcasters.
So coming soon in a more standardized manner. Okay. One more question. Can you talk about a bit more about TS monitoring and potential issues that can happen on TS monitoring?
Well, TS monitoring.
Hey, it's a big question.
It's a big question.
But
now,
maybe the main parts.
Of course, classical distribution. The TS problems will. You have the ETR 11290 that define the worst case scenarios if something breaks, which we are of course covering. There's a little bit catch now because if you're talking of primary distribution in the cloud, the approach is to do a TS in some cases, then still the same TS monitoring approaches might apply. The distribution as a chain is a bit different because it's now unicast and not multicast. It's point to point and not point to multipoint. But it seems that although the transport method is different, the problem are still the same.
Yeah,
You either, if your encoder works correctly, then your content is packaged correctly, then you might lose packets. So the same monitoring approach still apply.
Yeah, of course. So, and of course, it always starts with a video. You need the blackness and the signal loss and all that to start with, and
of course,
and go deeper from there. Thanks. One more question. When deploying a monitor solution for OTT, where do you see the greatest challenges? I would say from use cases in the field. We had a few of those, of course.
I would say the main challenge is not necessarily technology, because, of course, it's a new technology. It's not standardized. We found out that because the standardization is very partial, different vendors of equipment doing completely different things for the same content. And because OTT is more, at least where it started from, is more non-live in its approach, there are issues when it's come to live OTT, which sometimes it's not entirely natural, the flow. What do I call a live? Live is things have to happen on time, in a closed time window, and it's sometimes doesn't exactly happen as you expect. But more than technology, the thing that we encounter more and more, it's still a gap of knowledge. OTT is just new. And of course, it's more IT-centric and broadcast is more video-centric, and this gap is not yet closed.
Yeah, so you'll need a strong knowledge of IT, networking, and you'll need to know all your components. This is actually what we saw in most of our clients when they moved to OTT or added OTT to their applications. And the lack of IT knowledge and the OTT standard knowledge itself produced us a lot of work, and we found ourselves, helping them out with what we know and finding some way to bring this POC to be up and running. And it's important that you know the standard that you're going to use, and even have a few streams ready for testing and before you go live and things like that. And of course the network, which is
I would say it's the classical problem that in many organizations, IT and the video guys many times still fight each other.
Yeah, of course, the ITs want to go one way and the video want to go the other way, and you always need to find the way in the middle. Like we had this customer that had a VCAS, a Verimetrics VCAS server on-prem, and we had no access to it. And go convince the IT guys that we need access to the VCAS server for the KMS, and we also need access to the stream, so it's access to the web. Yeah. And you need to find other network adapters, and it's a whole architecture is a must. You need to do the architecture and a few dry tests before you go live.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, these are things that we saw. Well, Gal, it was a pleasure as always talking to you. Thank you guys all for joining. It was a pleasure having you as well. I hope you enjoyed today's session. You can go to TAG's website for a free trial, and if you have other questions that weren't answered, feel free to add them to the chat in this session or send us an email. We'll get in touch with you as soon as possible. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.